Hi, and thanks for joining us for another episode of the COSE Small Business After Hours podcast. We have another amazing guest with us today. Megan Kim, Executive Director for COSE, Board Chair Kevin Johnson, Managing Partner of NextGen Interactive. You're used to seeing us all the time, so it's really about our guests. And Kevin, tell us who we have with us today.
Hi, Megan. Thank you. Today we have with us Margie Judd. Margie is the CEO and President of Executive Arrangements. And Executive Arrangements is just a wonderful firm that has been operating for quite a while here in Northeast Ohio. I'm going to turn over to Margie. Margie, tell us about Executive Arrangements.
Well, it's a very unique niche, and I haven't met many other people who have a job like mine, or companies like mine. So about 100 times a year, we are asked by a company in Cleveland to help them woo talent to Northeast Ohio. And by that I mean we're told, listen, we've got a new Vice President of Digital Technology candidate that's sitting in his office in San Francisco. We'd like to move him to Cleveland to take a job, but his family says there's no way in the world they're coming to Cleveland. Here's their phone number, go fix it for us. So that's what we do, and everybody has a different way of being sold on Cleveland. It depends on where you're coming from, what your interests are, whether you're a young single person, a house full of kids, or empty nester, and what your hobbies and interests are. So nobody sees the same Cleveland twice.
I love that because what that really means is that you all play a major role in attracting talent to Cleveland. And so, you're right, a lot of people don't think of Cleveland as a destination, but you all, you think about GCP, some of our other organizations, Team Neo, these are entities that are out there trying to make that sell, right? And then they identify talent or a company that wants to come here. Same thing. They have to be sold. Enters Margie Judd and Executive Arrangements to talk about Northeast Ohio and then Cleveland specifically, and actually tell them why this is a great place. And quite frankly, from what I can see, you're doing a real good job because we're bringing a lot of companies and a lot of talent here that are medium-sized businesses and large businesses.
And I think the best part of my conversations with you is just hearing those stories of how do you figure out how to plan their day? So talk about that. So I always love how you dig in, you learn about the person, and you design this really cool experience for them when they come into town.
Well, it all starts with a phone call, gathering information about what's important to you. So we have about 40 open-ended questions that will help us really understand where someone's coming from. Where else have they lived? Where did they go to school? Do they have children that will be involved in the move or not? Is there a significant other involved, or are they coming solo? Do they use a city for arts and outdoors, or are they more of a bookworm and I want to find a book club and I want to find my little neighborhood group? So everyone is a different personality and has different interests, and that's where all the planning begins. So we start brainstorming right there. So for instance, this week we're talking about a woman who is coming from Florida. She's single, she's early 40s. She really wants to consider urban living, which is more and more the case, which makes me very, very excited because I've been in Tremont for 20 years
That's
myself.
awesome.
And she wants to hear about Shaker Square, the Heights, Gordon Square, Tremont, Ohio City downtown. And 20 years ago, we never got that question. Everyone was headed right to the suburbs because there weren't very many residential opportunities. So it's just really fun to see the city that you've lived in for so long through a fresh set of eyes every single day because you're trying to see it from their perspective.
How do you do your homework? I mean, it's interesting because you've got to see it through their perspective, but then you've got to be up on what's happening here, what's happening local. And that's got to be a lot of fun too. That makes you a subject matter expert, but how do you keep up on Cleveland, on Northeast Ohio? What's happening in Cleveland and its surrounding areas, if you would?
It's a wonderful continuing ed task that I take on with my whole staff. There's 15 of us, and everyone is an expert in a different area.
Oh, that's cool.
With different neighborhoods. Everyone's involved in the city in a different way. And so people will come to me on my team and say, listen, we've got somebody who's really interested in urban living or is very interested in getting involved in entrepreneurial organizations, or loves the theater, and I'm on the board of Playhouse Square, so I might have some insights there. So everyone brings their specialties to the table. And once a quarter, we do something called Executive Arrangements at University, EAU.
I love this. I want to come.
It's fun. This past Thursday, it was supposed to be in person. It was going to be our first in-person one since COVID, so it killed me that it was inclement weather and we had to go back to virtual. But we had Pam Barnes from Cuyahoga Valley National Park and Tracy Emmerich from the Countryside Initiative with the park talk about what's changed in the park since maybe before COVID, when a lot of people kind of hunkered down, even though they were still using the parks. They weren't going into buildings or visitor centers and those kinds of things. So she spent an hour, the two of them spent an hour talking to us about all of the new trails, the new visitor center in Boston Mills. It's just the most interesting. Like, all of my staff members are little sponges. They're taking notes. They know that they're going to share all of this information with a new candidate that's going to be getting in their car tomorrow.
So you know what? I'm convinced, because you're able to paint a really good picture of how this works. But I'm convinced that the way we're really going to find out is if Megan and I, we're the executives coming in and we kind of get the treatment.
Oh, I like this idea. Yeah, let's do it.
You need to know, everyone we've talked to, if there's something that we can leverage so that we can really get the experience, like the wine, regardless of what it is.
Yeah. You can plan a day for us. We'd be open to that.
Well, you know what? We send wrap-up notes after a day or two on the road with a candidate to the person that hired us, just so that they have a feeling of how we spent their money, how we used the day with their candidate. Give them any insights, like if this person was really sort of, this is a long shot, what we see as the odds of them actually accepting the job and moving to Cleveland.
Cool, yeah.
All the insights from spending 6 or 7 hours in the car with them, because usually that's like 4 or 5 more hours than they spent with them. And so we'll share that, and I'll usually get a call back from the client saying, oh my God, that was the most amazing tour. I've lived in Cleveland for 45 years and I haven't been to some of those places.
Right.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, everybody get in your car and go out and explore.
Well, I remember when you were telling me about, you planned like a day out on a boat and a special picnic lunch. And I was like, oh, I need to do this for me someday. Yeah, but it's amazing.
I don't know if you all have ever thought about it, but it just seems to me that you all should consider documenting Cleveland. You're in the perfect place. I mean, you and your team know Cleveland, and you probably know it in a way that most Clevelanders don't. And it would be a valuable, very, very exciting book, I suspect, if you put something like that together. Now, we're not trying to have you in a situation where you give out all the information, because then maybe no one would need you. But I doubt that. I mean, you all have a personal touch that I think really precedes you. And I've had, unsolicited, a number of major executives talk about Margie before I even knew who you were. And so that speaks volumes. That speaks volumes.
So, Margie, you talked about like the park and some of those other folks that you had at the university. Are there organizations or entities that you collaborate with on a regular basis when you're planning a lot of these experiences, or even things like, so when you mentioned the spouse, do you ever help make connections for the spouse when they're coming as well? Could that matter to them, if there's a job that they're looking for, anything like that? Talk a little bit about that. I'm just curious how deep you go and who you work with.
Well, this really shows how open and welcoming Cleveland is, because I've never called an organization and been turned back by when I asked, listen, we've got a candidate coming in and they have such a special interest in your organization, whether it's a nonprofit, a museum, a park, an organization like GCP. I'll give you it for instance. We were working with a clinic, helping them recruit a cancer doctor a few years ago. And they were coming from Nashville, and her husband is in the music business. Now that was a tough get.
Right.
Like Cleveland is known as the home of rock and roll, but a lot of music is being made in Nashville. So we arranged to have a curator from the Rock Hall take him behind the scenes to show him a little bit of the history of why our city got the Rock Hall, why we're known as the home of rock and roll, how that all developed. They even took them to the Tri-C archives and showed him some works of somebody he'd collaborated with who had since passed away.
Oh, wow.
So he was looking at original writings of song lyrics from somebody that he'd admired forever, and he just looked at the book and he almost had tears in his eyes. He said, I had no idea this even existed. This was so helpful. And he was in the middle of writing a book about this musician.
Oh, wow.
So he immediately started collaborating with that curator. And every time we call an organization, something magical like that happens. And you just think, there is something for everyone here if you just scratch a little bit below the surface.
That is awesome.
How do you see your work impacted by this new shift to remote? Because I've heard things like, oh, well, someone can do this job from somewhere else and they don't need to come here and then they can stay where they're at. Have you seen any of that start to happen already?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I will say that I'm really grateful that Executive Arrangements niche has been strongly in the C-suite and with healthcare. If you're not doing business in the healthcare world, I don't know how you are getting along in Cleveland. So it's no surprise that about 40% of our business comes from the big hospitals. And you can't do that job remotely.
Right.
The new surgeon has to be in the operating room.
Right.
So grateful for that and for the C-suite stuff. But just one layer down below that, we've heard of people who are now being given the option of remote work. A lot of it comes with the caveat, though, of this job will allow remote work. But if you have any interest in growing with the company and you take the next step up, chances are there's a relocation in your future. So why don't you just come to see what Cleveland is like now? Because if you would like to be with this company for 5 or 10 years, you need to at least be comfortable with the idea of moving here. So we're happy to hear that, and it seems like there's still an awful lot of companies in Cleveland and Akron who are going to require people to be together. They feel the energy that happens when you're walking down the hall and running into people and talking and collaborating and that sort of thing.
You know what we maintain at some of the things that we do is that ideation is not optimized remotely. There's something about the interaction of people that really makes that a magical process. So yes, we can have these nice 2D Zoom meetings and whatever the case may be, but you're just not really getting ahead. You're really not making the difference that you need to make. So we'll see how that plays out, but something tells me you're in a safe space.
I think so. I talked about sort of those little VIP behind the scenes touches that we do, the Rock Hall, Playhouse Square, the parks. But the other hallmark of our service is introducing them to people who have something in common with them in the community on their couple of days of exploration in Cleveland. So it might be someone who has 2 kids who are really into swimming like their kids, or it might be that the spouse has a job that's very similar to their spouse's job, or maybe they're coming from Boston and this couple lived in Boston for 10 years, or whatever it is that we think will help open them up and make them feel like, okay, there's people like us here, we can do this, this is going to be our 4th or 5th move, but we can do this. And that all had to pause, obviously, during COVID. We made a lot of pivots, like everybody. If I never have to say that word again, I'll be like,
I know.
Lord. But it sounds like there might even be some more coming up. So we introduced people over video chats. We did walks out in the metro parks with them 6 feet apart with masks on, walking and talking. We had outdoor picnic lunches where they were sitting at a park and conversing as opposed to being inside in the restaurant. And I just think there's all sorts of ways to connect with people, but in person, looking into someone's eyes 2 feet away and being in real life, there's nothing to replace it.
Margie, one of the things that comes to mind when I listen to you is the word creativity. You all are, if you're anything, you're creative about how you go about doing what you do. It's not a static situation. It's very, you're always learning, you're always being innovative in what you do. Tell us about one of the most interesting experiences you've had in going about trying to convince or encourage someone or some company to move to Cleveland.
So this was a few years ago, but a manufacturing company on the east side was recruiting someone who said yes to the job before he told his wife and his daughter, which, by the way, I would never recommend.
Bad move.
And so he was now doing mea culpas, and how do I convince my 16-year-old who's a sophomore in high school and my wife who have been in Milwaukee forever to come to Cleveland, because I'm going to be traveling 50% of the time. They're going to be at home without me, angry at me. I'm going to come home from these trips, and it's not going to be fun to walk into my front door. So we found out as much as we could about the wife and the daughter, whatever they were willing to share. And his daughter was only a sophomore, was already on the varsity basketball team for her public high school, which tended to be more like juniors and seniors, but she was a really good player. And this was her whole life. These kids hung out together, her teammates. So we revolved the whole day around the thought that at 3 o'clock, we have to be in Chagrin Falls for the girls' varsity basketball game, because the way they described their very Norman Rockwell town with a gazebo in the middle, it just made us think of like a Hudson or Rocky River, a Chagrin Falls. So we called the coach of the basketball team and we said, here's what we're trying to do, just so you know who those people are in the stands. So when my 2 executive arrangements guides arrived with mom, dad, and the daughter, the coach saw them and came up into the stands and introduced himself and invited the daughter to come down and sit on the bench with the team. And she shot layups at halftime, and unsolicited from anyone, one girl on the team had taken out a piece of paper and written down her name and her cell phone number, and everyone on the bench did the same thing, and they handed this piece of paper to the girl.
Oh, that's
and the
so
last
cool.
one said something like, if you move to Cleveland, we're your new teammates. And she walked back up into the stands, and she had this giant smile on her face, and she said, I think Cleveland could be fun, Dad.
Oh my gosh. You couldn't have designed that any better.
And when the dad looked at us and he had tears in his eyes, he said, you have no idea what you just did for my family. Like, my life just changed because of this day, because somebody paid attention to what was important to us.
And because it was hell before. But
That's right.
Once he made that decision, oh my goodness.
So not every day with executive arrangements is that like transformative.
Right.
But I bet almost every one of them has a moment where you can just see them mentally click in like, all right, I think we're going to do this. And their body language changes, and you just feel like a whole different energy about them, and it's, you've got them, so it's good.
I think that's the story for the ages in terms of a man getting out of the doghouse. That's a husband getting out of the dog. I mean, come on, really.
I mean, we should have had like a really nice gift basket in the office after that, right?
That's right. I agree. I agree.
A minimum. Oh my God.
So you were talking about some of the meetups that you arrange. So I have to assume that in your business, networking is really, really important, because you have all these people, you're trying to introduce people, so you have to know this Boston couple or this couple. So, I mean, are you always out meeting people and connecting and then recording? How do you keep track of all that?
What's your database?
Well, it is. It's a, Microsoft D365, and it's like no office database in the world, because it says where you went to college and what you like to eat and what your hobbies are, and if you belong to a house of worship, like all the ways we could think of to connect you.
Right.
Because we have to go into the database and say, do we know anybody who's a Mormon who has kids this age who likes to ski and is coming from New York?
Right. Right.
That's how granular we need to get. So I have what I lovingly call new friend-itis, and as I leave a cocktail party, I'm like mentally cataloging like, oh yeah, she would be a great community guest for, and I'm trying to think of the kind of personality profile. So I've had a lot of people look at me and saying, you're trying to put me into your database, aren't you? And I said, well, that should be flattering. You're a great representative of our town.
That's awesome. And so I just want to jump all the way back to the beginning, because you have been the owner of the company for how many years now?
2004. How many years is that?
So since 2004, but before that you were just a part of the team, and then you bought out the owner, right?
Yes.
So did you ever think that you were going to own your own business? Was this something you always wanted to do, or did it just happen that way and you kind of became the owner?
I had no interest in being my own boss or my business owner, to be quite frank. I was very content working for someone else. Flo Pollock, who's one of the two women, Flo Pollock and Cindy Denny started the company in the late 70s when like the river had just been on fire.
Right.
And they really, really needed the services of executive arrangements. So I worked for Flo. Cindy had retired for a dozen years. And then when she was getting ready to retire, she approached me. And I was always happy to be her number two and to bring in sales, help out with operations, do whatever she needed, like anybody does in a tiny little company. And we arranged an asset purchase agreement, which made it really easy for me. We didn't get banks involved at all. It was a 3-year payout where I was able to use the profits from the company to pay her. And it was a challenge because it was like buying an extra house in 3 years. But we had 3 really good years, thank goodness. And I officially became the owner in 2007. And she was a wonderful mentor to me, and along with a lot of other people, but I had no interest in doing it. And then I had to really switch my mindset because you're no longer working on projects, you're helping other people do the projects. And you are figuring out how to make everybody else's job easier, but you're not actually doing the job. And that was a real challenge for me. So there's some things I refused to give up. I have to be part of the brainstorming of every candidate that we're thinking about. And in 5 minutes, I might say, I don't know anybody in that genre, like ask some other staff members. But 50% of the time, I will think of 5 people for them to meet and places for them to go. And I love that. That's the most fun part of the job. And then the client contact is also incredibly fun, but I've really, really been missing that since March of 2020.
Right.
Because staring at somebody on a computer screen is just the opposite of what anybody who owns a small business and loves people and connections loves to do. I mean, you stare at a screen for 8 hours a day and you just don't feel fulfilled like sitting here with the
Totally
two of you
agree.
in
I
person.
totally agree. I know.
It's energizing.
It is.
And staring at a computer is de-energizing, and so I'm really glad that things opened back up.
Yeah, and my eyes are starting to hurt staring at. I had to get those blue glasses. I don't know if you guys got the blue glasses, but
Yeah,
you get a little tired of staring at it. But
Well, let me ask you this. I'm going to follow up on Megan's question because you went from being a contributor, a major contributor, and I say major because when you have a small company, most of the people there are major contributors. You went from that to running a business. What lessons, what skills did you have to pull in that you didn't really have before? I think that would be a very interesting conversation and a very interesting part of what we're talking about. It'd be great for people to understand that. Because a lot of people think it's easy. Oh, I can run, someone told me, I think it was, the bottom line was, if you're at a company after company after company, and the boss is always stupid, what's the common denominator? Okay.
Right.
So my question becomes now, all right, you're on the other side of this. What did you have to learn? Because you had to hit the ground running.
I did, and I am a lifelong learner, not only of things about Cleveland, but how to run a business, which is why COSE's been incredibly helpful for me. The Entrepreneurs Organization has been incredibly helpful. John Carroll, Entrepreneurs Association. I remember, because I'm an alum, I called the head of John Carroll's EA, and I said, I need a group of people to help advise me. I bought a business last week, and I don't know what I don't know.
last week.
Literally. So Mark Hauserman brought me in and introduced me to this panel of people, and he told me to bring your financials, all of this. So this was, 2004. We were a little company. We weren't even on QuickBooks, right? So I brought in our bookkeeper still did things on a ledger with number 2 pencil, and I was like, and they all looked up at me and they were like, oh no, okay. The first thing you need to do is invest in QuickBooks. I was like, what's QuickBooks? So when I tell you that's how, I don't know, I just needed a lot of education. And then I just needed to know that it wasn't about me and bringing in business. It was, how do I find the best team members and how do I support them? So it's going from being an internal me and sales hat and I need to bring in business and I need to make this company successful to external, and how do I find the best possible people and then give them every tool that they need, and everybody needs something different. And then you have to really work to be much better at people skills, because you're not out on the road pulling in business, you're making a team work successfully. So trust me, I'm still learning every single day.
Yeah. And that's part of the fun, I guess, of it. You know, you're always learning. It is a challenge to get from good to great, great to excellent, and then maintaining and sustaining. And you can't do that without constantly learning, incorporating, and trying to get better.
I agree. And you know, one of the things that I did that I've never been sorry about is in January 2020, I decided I was going to do complete open books with my staff. Here's what I make. Here's what everyone makes. Here's what we pay for our rent. Here's what we pay for telephones. Here's how much I spend from everything. And I was very uncomfortable doing that, but I thought, if they don't trust me and the numbers and know what goals we're all working towards, it's always just going to be me with a bunch of employees, not a team.
Right.
So 3 months later, COVID hit, and we had to, within 6 months, let go of our office, all go remote. I had built trust from January to March with weekly meetings about where we stand, what our goals are, what the numbers are. Every number was on a whiteboard. Like, they felt like, okay, we're in this together. I just don't know if that would have happened without me extending that kind of information to them.
That's huge.
And when I share that information with fellow business owners, they're like, I would never do that. I was like, what's the downside? Yeah. Like, you all make more money?
Right, exactly. Well, they're more motivated, yes. It's funny, because I was going to ask you that too when you were talking about when you took over the business, because you are the face of executive arrangements, and how you've started to kind of nurture that next group, because at some point you're probably going to want to, retire and sell the company. So just kind of building that trust already, you're starting to look at kind of the next phases of the organization as well, I'm assuming.
We are, and we were just this morning talking about we need to start looking for some additional people, because business has been brisk. We are a company that's on the aging side of the spectrum, and I think we need to backfill with a lot of people from like 25 to 45, because we need a succession plan. And we, like a lot of small businesses, you just like keep working and working and working, and you don't think about what's coming next. We really, really need to do that, because at some point, all of the leadership team would like to retire.
Yeah,
and
sure.
We're all within about 5 years of each other, and I hear this problem a lot. And it's like we're all in a bubble here, and we need to bring in the next chain of command, and we have to take what we do in terms of talent attraction that we do for other people and do it for ourselves.
Yeah. Your legacy will be in part determined by what happens after you leave. And so it becomes very important, and you begin to focus on that now, as you just said, and really put that in place, because you're going to want to see that brand that you really helped grow and nurture. You're going to want to see it in retirement continue to flourish, not go down the tubes. So it's something that's worth the time, because you've put in a lot of work. Your brand is fantastic.
Well, I really appreciate you saying that. I feel like our reputation is everything, especially in the service business. You're only as good as what people are chattering about in the community. And I have the most amazing staff, and everybody represents us in the community unbelievably well. And they're in 14 different neighborhoods, and so they're all talking over the back fence when you borrow the lawnmower or at dinner parties. And so I have this amazing group of people who are all helping to quietly market executive arrangements. I don't think we've paid for advertising in 10 years. It's all word of mouth. So the new head of advertising at Nestle calls you and says, you worked with me when I came in 2 years ago.
Right.
Now I'm recruiting somebody, and it just keeps backfilling like that.
Well, that says a lot about your brand, yeah.
Executive Arrangements, the go-to company when you want to move to Cleveland, Ohio. No doubt about it.
That's right. Marty, we look forward to continuing to follow you. Thank you for everything that you do for Cleveland, because we love that you're the most amazing ambassador for our region. And like talent attraction is such a big deal now. So I know that you are in the thick of it. and helping to make sure people see how amazing Cleveland is. So thank you for joining us today, and we will see you on the next episode of the podcast.